Our next conversation focuses on the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, where there is a call from the chairman to make the Public Defender's Department permanent. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the Chief Public Defender of the Public Defender's Department, Ms. Hasine Shaikh, as well as the Deputy Chief of the Public Defender's Department, Mr. Raphael Morgan. Welcome to WSN.
Good morning.
Good morning, Keith, and thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for joining me this morning. So let's start actually with you, Mr. Morgan. If you can just tell us and the viewing public precisely what is the role of the Public Defender's Department?
Well, the Public Defender's Department, as you mentioned, is part of the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority. We represent their criminal arm. So we handle all of their criminal matters. Currently, we are restricted to the High Court, so we handle the management of the High Court matters. Those persons who wish to be legally aided, we either handle the matters internally or we brief them to the external panel. The magisterial matters are still left to the external panel. So we essentially manage all of the criminal legal aid in the country.
Now, this started off, I think, in March 2020 by the former Attorney General, Faris Arawi, and it started off as a pilot project. But according to the chairman of the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, Senior Counsel Gilbert Peterson, it's proven its worth. How do we judge the success of the Public Defender's Department?
Well, I think to judge the success, we have to look back as to what we were created to achieve. So the Public Defender's Department essentially was created to deal with problems that we saw in the criminal justice system on the defense point of view. One of the problems essentially was the backlog, which, is a never-ending problem, really. And then two, the fact that we have a very small criminal bar and there weren't enough defense attorneys that were servicing that criminal bar. When you had about 20 odd attorneys that were dealing with matters, they obviously would have had limitations on their schedule. So now, with the Public Defender's Department, we started off at a capacity of 30. We're now at full capacity would be 38. We currently have 29 attorneys in employ, and right now we're handling about 1,026 matters. So in terms of how do we judge in terms of are we actually before the courts actively there, which we are. We're handling 1,026 matters. And then also how have we contributed to removing some of the backlog. And I would judge that by the trials we've done. We've done about 17 trials. Of course, COVID put a little bit of a wrench into that process. And then, of course, we are also heavily engaged in plea bargaining, and to date we have over 50 matters that have been completed by plea bargaining. Okay. So we are working.
Excellent. Well, in that same sense, Mr. Morgan and Ms. Shaikh, Senior Counsel Gilbert Peterson also suggests that if a balancing act was to be done, if we were to study the finances that have been invested in the Public Defender's Department, you would see that there has been value for money. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, we understand that here in Trinidad, once an individual is charged, the public deem them as guilty. That has been a stigma that we've all been trying to break. The issue, however, is trying to convince them that their money, the public's money, has been spent wisely, in the sense that it is a free service, and people will see, listen, my money is going into this free service to probably aid criminals. I mean, how do we try to break that misinformation? Where do we even start?
Well,
Open question.
I know, and you're asking a lot in that question. So the thing about public perception is this. When someone is charged, often the police service might issue a press release indicating this person was charged with a particular offense and, put a mugshot sometimes, that sort of thing. And it creates that impression that we are, in fact, saying that this person is guilty. Now, what we don't always have on the flip side is what happens from that person who was charged on day one to that person whose trial was treated with some 10 to 15 years later. Because the reality is it takes a long time to go from that day when you're sent in magistrate's court and the charges are read to you that first time to when you're actually in the High Court being judged by your peers, whether it be jury or a judge alone. So I don't think that end result of, was that a successful prosecution? Did they have the evidence? Was this person genuinely charged with real evidence that should have been? Our job as public defenders and defense attorneys on the whole, our job is to assist the accused person to have justice before the court. Justice before the court is not the equivalent of a release. Justice before the court is ensuring that their rights have been upheld, that we are offering the best defense that is available to them within the boundaries of the law.
Mr. Morgan, I saw you shaking your head there when Ms. Shaikh mentioned justice before the court is not being released.
Yes, it's part of something that we try to inculcate into our public defenders, because as an individual attorney, you would see an acquittal as a mark of success. But we also try to tell them that an acquittal isn't the only mark of success, because justice must be served on both sides. If the person is convicted on the evidence in a fair trial, and then or he pleads to the crime that he committed, that he has given instructions that he has committed, then that is also justice. Society has gotten its pound of flesh, and the victim, in some way, they can never be properly compensated, but in some way, they have gotten justice for what they have gone through. And the process, while he is incarcerated, is supposed to rehabilitate him to become a productive member of society. I use the word supposed to very pointedly.
No, that's fair. That's understood. And we all hope that that happens. But let me now ask your positions on this. The head of the Criminal Bar Association, Senior Counsel Israel Khan, he believes in the mandate of the Public Defender's Department, but he has also publicly expressed that, in his opinion, it may have been more prudent if it was not attached, the Public Defender's Department, to the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, if it was actually separate and attached to the magistrates' courts. Have magistrates appointing attorneys where they see that individuals before the court are not being properly represented. Are there benefits to this? What's your positions on this from the head of the Criminal Bar Association?
So we appreciate what Senior was saying, and in terms of what he suggested, it's not that it does not exist currently before the magistrates' court in terms of magistrates being able to give orders for legal aid. A magistrate, an accused person, can go before magistrates and indicate that I don't have an attorney and I don't have any money to afford an attorney, and they can grant an order for legal aid. So that's something that is available right now. The external bar, which are basically attorneys who have indicated their interest to participate in the legal aid process, they are quite extensive, because at the magistrates' court, the type of matters that are dealt with summarily are not as serious, and then of course we have the preliminary inquiries that are continuing. But for us to be attached to the magistrates' court, it may not be the best or the most feasible option, especially in light of the anticipated abolition of the preliminary inquiries, where everything, and everything is a lot, we're talking thousands of matters, would be moving to the High Court, and we would be engaging in another process, the sufficiency hearing. So in terms of that, I think right now we're in that bit of abeyance. So yes, while there may be a need at magistrates' court, we do believe that the external panel sufficiently services them.
Let's speak about staffing and staffing levels. What are the current staffing levels at the Public Defender's Department? Do they meet the required staffing levels?
So currently we have 29 attorneys. There is myself and Ms. Shaikh. Then there are five of the senior public defender, 2 seniors, and then we have vacancies at almost each tier thereafter. So we aren't at full capacity to service the numerous number of matters that do exist and that we are mandated to take on. We do need to take on more attorneys, and we may need to add more capacity to our department. So currently, we are coping with what we have. We are doing well with what we have because we have achieved a lot. Eventually, when sufficiency hearings come on, or maybe even before, because there is a move to get indictments filed quicker, to get matters moved from the magistrates' court to the High Court in a much quicker fashion, that will create a need for more staff.
The vacancies that currently exist, have there been any challenges or obstacles to actually filling those vacancies?
So in terms of the lower tiers, which would be the ones that require less experience, we don't have problems filling them. So we're ongoing recruitment at the moment for some of the lower tiers. But with respect to the higher tiers, which would be the over 10 years call, so of the 5 senior trainees we have that are above 10 years call at that tier, there are 4 vacancies at that tier. And that has proven to be a little bit more challenging because ultimately you're looking for fairly senior practitioners to enter into that role. And that has proven to be a bit difficult because, as I said, the criminal bar is relatively small. The vast majority of the attorneys are either with us or at the DPP's office, and if not the actual criminal bar itself, we're talking 20 to 30 odd persons who actively practice at the High Court.
Mm-hmm. So actually trying to persuade students or those who actually have graduated from Hewarding Law School to actually enter the field of criminal law, that also has been an issue, it seems. Trying to get them, persuade them, instead of perhaps going into civil law, criminal law, we need individuals here, and it also is an opportunity for you all. Is there any sort of advice that from 2 individuals who are very much senior within criminal law, what advice would you give students?
In terms of coming into criminal law?
In terms of coming into criminal law.
Criminal law is very rewarding in some aspects and very trying in others. Once you are willing to do hard work, you will enjoy criminal law. Once you are willing to do legal aid, you will enjoy criminal law because as a young attorney, it's a large part of our practice because it's how we wet our feet, it's how we become experienced, it's how we build our name. We have to be realistic that anybody who has a serious matter before the High Court is not going to come to someone who is 1 year or 2 years out and give them a large amount of money to do a trial. You need to, we call it go through the trenches, but you need to prove your worth, do the small matters and build yourself through that. Criminal law ultimately is rewarding. It's just you have to put in the hard work. It's one of the most fascinating areas of law, and it is the one area of law where you get to be an advocate almost 90% of the time. So if you like to talk, if you like to cross-examine, if you like to speak to a jury, this is your arena.
I think we all appreciate that advice because it's honest. It's absolutely honest, Ms. Shaikh?
I agree with Mr. Morgan. Criminal law, it is very rewarding. What I can say, having done primarily criminal law my entire practice, it's that it also requires a degree of passion. You have to love it. You genuinely have to love it. And you have to recognize its service, because the reality is that the persons who you are representing tend to be more of the underprivileged. They're not the persons who come with money. They're not the persons who have the greatest literacy rates. So it really takes a lot of patience, and that's where the passion comes in. You have to want to do it. And you have to step up and realize that, every day is different and every day is a new challenge. But ultimately, if you are happy doing it and you genuinely love the law, this is the place for you.
I think with respect to the Public Defender's Department, from everything that we've discussed this morning, it doesn't seem as though this is a pilot project anymore. So the call to make it permanent is one that I hope is not just echoed. I hope it is actually received, because 3 years for a pilot project is very much understood. But if I'm not mistaken, I think most recently contracts were actually renewed.
Yes.
So really a pilot project? No, not really.
So in terms of every new initiative, the Public Defender's Department is one of 2 in the Caribbean, essentially. The other department similar to us that works like us is in the Bahamas. So we are a relatively new department. It's a new initiative. It's something that's been put in place, and obviously they need to evaluate its efficiency, whether it's working, and if it is achieving the mandate. Now, we believe that it is, and we hope that the renewal of the contract says that. But ultimately, as our Director Chairman would have indicated, we have no legislative framework. Mm-hmm. There is no legislation that recognizes our existence, so to speak. So to have that legislative underpinning, I think, would be important.
Definitely. How, and I think a lot has been said already, but specifically the role of the Public Defender's Department in terms of the criminal justice system here in Transvaal, how crucial is its role in the entire system?
I think our department is extremely crucial to the criminal justice system because you now have a dedicated department of 29 attorneys who specifically represent a large segment of the population who are underprivileged and underserviced for a very long time. So the external bar, while they had the matters and they did the matters, and as a former member of the external bar, I cannot knock them. They do human service for the remuneration that they get. Mm-hmm. Now you have a department that is solely dedicated towards optimizing the service that is given to legally aided persons. And we don't just do matters in court. We do other things. So we do prison visits. So we go to the prison, we see them, we make sure that if they need an attorney, their request is documented, it's sent to the court, and the court then facilitates that request. We also do other initiatives. So there is it is court, but it's more registrar's court. We do the fast track court where persons who wish to plead are brought before the court. We represent all of them, which is at this point, I think, over 300 and something matters, which we go to almost on a weekly basis to make sure that their indictments are filed, that the director is listening to their pleas, anything like that. If we even do their welfare issues. So we write to the prisons if they need clothes, if they need to change a bed, if they need to be taken to the doctor. We do a lot of work that isn't seen by the public. So it isn't just us appearing in court and then you see a headline, man freed after 30 years represented by Public Defender X. That is the tip of the iceberg of what we do. So when I say we are crucial, just like the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, we are their counterpart. Mm-hmm. We are smaller, but we are, I would dare say, just as crucial. Because now that we have been inserted into the criminal justice process, if we are to be removed, there will be a huge gap because of the services that we have provided thus far. Mm-hmm. So that would be my answer.
I think, some self-criticism this morning. It's our part as well as media to report on these things as well, and to inform the viewing public all the time of these things, and that's precisely why we're having this conversation this morning. You just mentioned, Mr. Morgan, what seems to be the relationship between the Director of Public Prosecutions, that office, and the Public Defender's Department. Ms. Shaikh, how would you could you elaborate a bit on that particular relationship between the Office of the DPP and the Public Defender's Department?
Sure. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is responsible for every prosecution, essentially, in Trinidad and Tobago. If they don't initiate it, they can take it over, if the director chooses to do so. They are, so given that we practice primarily in the high courts, they are in the high courts as well, and we work with them. Ultimately, a trial cannot start if there's not a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Even in the process of plea bargaining, which requires us to write to the director, it also engages the officer's attention. So we work with them for that. For fast track, which Mr. Morgan just would have spoken about, which deals with persons who wish to plead guilty and are awaiting indictments, they also appear at that. So it's also another area that we work on with them. So we are linked, indelibly linked. That's the reality. We are not able to work or work even efficiently if we don't have their assistance as well as their support in getting the things done.
Well, working efficiently, on that particular note, most recently we heard of the issues, it was raised once more about the staffing levels at the Office of the DPP. Should the Office of the DPP get to optimum staffing levels, what does that mean for the work of the Public Defender's Department?
I believe if the office of the DPP gets 137 staff members, that we would have a serious problem catching up with them, because the reality is our maximum capacity is 38. So at that point, I think, or even before that point, we need to have those discussions as to whether our office needs to be expanded, whether we need to increase the external bar, which are the private attorneys who are wishing to participate in criminal law. Do we need to build capacity at that level so that we have more persons who are able to do matters as well? But overall, I think it's a conversation to be had, because even for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to fill 137 attorneys, they have to come from somewhere. And those persons coming in, they're not all going to come in at entry level. So ultimately, that conversation about training, about enticing the younger professionals, or keeping those who are in the criminal arena currently here, is something that needs to be had.
Well, Ms. Shaikh, Mr. Morgan, I want to thank you very much for joining me on AM Prime this morning. It certainly has been a pleasure, and I myself are a lot more educated and informed as to the role of the Public Defender's Department. My final question would be, and I know I've kept you guys here a while, but
That's fine.
That's perfectly
Totally
fine.
fine.
We're happy to be here.
The legislative framework, as mentioned, and how crucial it is to the Public Defender's Department to make it permanent. Has that conversation already been had, and has it been well received by the Office of the Attorney General?
So in terms of the evaluation of the office and so forth, I think that's a process that's ongoing. And I think that they will have to evaluate us in addition to generally the criminal justice system and what they wish to do for it. So I suspect when they have that process, we do have a joint select committee that is going to be in the month of May, whereby conversations are going to be had about the efficiency of the criminal justice system and what solutions and suggestions that all of the major stakeholders have. I would suspect that that would also be a very important piece of the puzzle for them to inform their decisions.
Well, I certainly might, following this GSE, see both of you guys back on this program again. Yeah?
In addition to that GSC, we were on another GSC, I believe it was earlier this year, which was chaired by the Honorable Senator Hazel Thompson IE, on specifically legal aid and the Public Defender's Department, and it examined our performance, and I dare say that we came out with commendation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your presence this morning on AM Prime. Keep up the fantastic work, and I look forward in future to be welcoming you to the program once more.
Thank you very much for having us, Keaton.
All the best.